The federal government's plan to reduce penalties for certain criminal offenses. Here's what would change if their bill is passed. The feds want to remove mandatory minimum penalties for offenses like drug possession. They say, and multiple studies support the idea, minimum sentences have disproportionately hurt Indigenous and Black offenders, as well as those struggling with addiction. The bill also aims to give judges more discretion in sentencing. If someone isn't a public safety threat, for example, a judge can order house arrest or a curfew or counseling. Finally, the new law would also require police and prosecutors to consider alternatives to penalties for simple drug possession, like addiction treatment. Joining me now to talk about this a bit more, David Lametti, the Minister of Justice. Hi, Minister Lametti. Good to see you again. Thanks for making time for the show.
It's my pleasure.
Minister, the bill you put forward today explicitly acknowledges drug use should be addressed as a health and social issue. But despite calls from mayors, premiers, and public health officers, your government has so far refused to take the full step and decriminalize simple possession. Why not?
Well, look, I took a big step today answering a different question, which was how do I address overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous peoples in the criminal justice system, in particular in the area of sentencing, but also with respect to diversion. And what we've done here is taken a huge step. We've reversed a policy that has failed from the previous Conservative governments, a tough on crime, so-called tough on crime policy that really was more a slogan than anything else, ends up putting people in jail who ought to be diverted elsewhere because they have a health problem or because they have other issues to solve, and not focusing on the people who really deserve to be punished for serious crimes seriously. So we've taken a big step today. And yes, there are links to larger questions of decriminalization, but that's not the question I was asking. What I'm doing is making diversion the default measure for police officers and for prosecutors. And I am directly attacking MMPs, which aren't helping the situation. They're punishing single moms and first-time offenders and people who are no threat to public safety and who could be better rehabilitated in the community. And bringing back conditional sentences, which are critically important to allowing judges the flexibility to punish people in a constructive way in order to help society.
What ensures, though, that diversion is the default? And I ask that because, for example, there is language in this bill that encourages prosecutors, police, not to go the route of conviction or severe sentences, to pursue alternative measures. But there is nothing that, other than taking away the mandatory minimums, but there's nothing that, it says you have to, you cannot arrest, you cannot put in jail. It's encouraging, it's not forbidding.
Let me just correct one little point because I think it's important. There are severe sentences in the criminal code, and people who have committed horrendous crimes or serious crimes will be punished severely or seriously up towards the maximums. What we're talking about is the other end, where people aren't a threat to the community, and where we could treat questions better as a health problem or as a social problem and find other solutions. With respect to diversion, we are sending a clear message that we do not want to use the weight of the criminal justice system when it has an overly negative impact on over-incarceration of Black and Indigenous peoples, when the crimes aren't serious, when these people are not a threat to the community, when the problem, like problematic addiction, is a health problem. That's a pretty serious message that we're sending to prosecutors, that we're sending to police officers, and we're also investing in the resources. In the fall economic statement, we have begun to invest in community justice centers and the kinds of programs that will give police officers, for example, a real option to divert people instead of taking them to the police station, to take them to a place that will help a person address a problematic addiction or address another social problem that may have led them to a gang or something like that. So this is critically important, and it's a critically important message we're sending about what the criminal justice system ought to do and what it ought not to do. And we're increasing public safety and making it more efficient along the way.
You have allotted some funding, yes, as you say, you've begun to. But for example, when you look at drug treatment courts, only 24 of them, one of them only sees, I think it's between 30 and 40 people a year. Have you really committed the kind of money that is necessary to enforce the message you say you're delivering today?
Well, we're obviously starting, and we're going in that direction. Let me just say that drug treatment courts are not the first step; they're one of the last steps. We actually would rather have police officers divert people to community justice centers, restorative justice programs, and other health programs, so that they can avoid a drug treatment court. You still end up with in effect, participation in something that's a bit more weighty in the criminal justice system. It's still a court. We'd rather they not even get there because they don't pose a threat to society. If we treat it as a health issue, if it's problematic addiction, it will get better results. We'll get better results for victims. We'll get better results for the transgressors and for society generally.
But that doesn't answer the question if there's more money coming, not just for drug treatment courts, but the other kind of treatment and the other endeavors that you're mentioning right now. Because if, in fact, police are being encouraged, and not mandated, but encouraged to go that route, those systems need to exist in full in order for them to be utilized. Is that not true?
Oh, it's definitely true. And I think as a government, we'll have to be prepared to invest those resources. But let me tell you, and many Canadians don't realize this, that incarcerating people on minimum mandatory penalties, it costs us over $115,000 per year to incarcerate a man in the federal system. To incarcerate a woman, it is even more expensive. And oftentimes when we're incarcerating women on minimum mandatory penalties without conditional sentences, we're taking their kids into care as well. So this is actually something that is going to, I think, save us money over the long term. In fact, the United States is abandoning minimum mandatory penalties, even in the most conservative of conservative areas of the United States, because it's a cost-saving measure.
Do you regret that it took your government so long? I remember an interview the Prime Minister did back in 2015 expressing his desire to get rid of mandatory minimums. There was a report conducted in 2017 that concluded there was no evidence that mandatory minimums have deterred crime. Some studies suggest that they can result in overly harsh penalties and disparities, things that you use to underpin what you did today, yet it took nearly 6 years for your government to act.
Look, I can only speak to the time that I was minister, and I have worked at this diligently, based on a number of those studies, as well as other information since the time I became minister. And I think what you're seeing today is the result of I think, a pretty conscientious effort on the part of my team and myself in order to get this to a place where we can actually help Canadians better protect society, and in particular protect Black and Indigenous Canadians from overrepresentation.
Respectfully, Minister, you were a part of the government prior to becoming Justice Minister too. Should the government have acted faster, given the impact you're describing today that this will have on the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people in this country, in our jails, in the criminal justice system? Would it not have been incumbent on you to do this earlier?
I had a role to play in caucus. I tried to play that role as best I could to advance this position. When I became minister, I had the tools at my disposal in order to do it, and I'm happy to be where I am today.
Okay, before I let you go,
Minister, to help people.
Minister, before I let you go, I do want to ask you one more question about decriminalization. And specifically, we've seen various city councils, even premiers, say that they're going to go to the government, the federal government, your government, and ask for exemptions so that they can decriminalize simple possession in their jurisdiction. Will your government at least permit that? If you're not going to take the step to decriminalize at the federal level, will you permit that?
Well, certainly Minister Hajdu has responded to Vancouver and British Columbia quite specifically that she's open to a dialogue on looking at decriminalization as one response to the opioid crisis. So I think that discussion is already happening with respect to Minister Hajdu and the calls that are coming from municipalities.
But all Minister Hajdu has said is that she's willing to work with them. And with respect, we've been asking ministers of health and ministers of justice for the past 5 years if this is something that they will act on because of the calls from people like Dr. Bonnie Henry in British Columbia. Is it just something that you're going to look at, or is this something that you are willing to pursue? Will you allow cities and provinces to be exempt from criminalizing simple drug possession?
Well, as I've said, these discussions are ongoing. They're certainly being undertaken in the public realm. We've received letters. I've received a letter from my counterpart in British Columbia on this matter. So these discussions are happening. For my part, I took something that was in my bailiwick, criminal sentencing, and I think I have really turned the page on a failed policy, and done my part to advance the discussion, and we'll continue with other discussions as a government, with other governments, and as a society in terms of the directions in which we want to go.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Appreciate it. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.